can't. And in fact, in every marriage, you can't prevent something like this happening. You can believe it won't. You can trust your partner, but realistically, you cannot prevent something like this. Thank you for joining me here on The Doctor Is In. I appreciate it so very much. Good Lord permit. Now see you Monday on ePerson Money. Thanks, Andrew Kruchek, for all you do over there in Ave. Walk with God. You walk with God, and you'll just be a better person to live with all the way around.
For information on Dr. Ray's presentations, books, and CDs, visit drray.com and follow him on Facebook and Instagram. The Doctor Is In is a co-production of Ave Maria Radio and EWTN Radio and carried across the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
In your car, at the office, or in your home, we're always here. This is the Guadalupe Radio Network, radio for your soul.
Monsignor Charles Pope here. A life lived joyfully is now the quest. As St. Therese of Lisieux said, the world is your ship, not your home. Let's journey together on this voyage to heaven. Each Tuesday and Friday, I'll take a look at interesting headlines affecting the church and the world. Tune in each weekday afternoon for The Quest, 4 p.m. Central, 5 Eastern, right here on the Guadalupe Radio Network.
Have you ever heard an aviation emergency on the news? You hear the pilot and ATC talking, but what do you miss? The pilot asking their aircraft dispatcher what they should say on the radio to sound cool. Aircraft dispatchers are the problem solvers working at the airline's operations center. My wife and I run Aircraft Dispatcher Training Center in Farmers Branch. Thanks to the amazing program here at the GRN, we have become Catholic and now sponsors of this great station.
Listen to The Spirit World with Debbie Georgiani and Adam Bly.
Demonic activity appears to be on the rise. I'm Debbie Georgiani, and I invite you to join Adam Bly and me this weekend for The Spirit World.
On The Spirit World, we offer a Catholic perspective on angels, demons, and how the spiritual and physical worlds interact.
Saturdays at 10 a.m. Central, 11 a.m. Eastern on the Guadalupe Radio Network and other EWTN radio affiliates. Visit grnonline.com/spiritworld.
Now that my healing has begun, I finally have a sense of freedom from that shame.
I never thought that I'd be forgiven for the choice I made so long ago. Now I know I've been forgiven.
Welcome to Back to the Father, a show about the journey of life focused on our final end, which is God Himself, our loving Father. And now, here's your host, Dave Palmer.
Well, welcome everybody to this week's edition of Back to the Father here on the Guadalupe Radio Network's social media sites. We're glad that you are with us. We've been a little unpredictable the last couple of weeks. Last Friday, I had to, I was very blessed to go down to the Austin area to MC a Fullness, a Truth event, and I had to be there Friday at about 4 or 5 or so, so it was just cutting it a little bit too close to do the show and also get down there for that. So that's why we didn't do a show last Friday. And then the week before that, gosh, was I sick or okay? So it's been a while since we've done a show, but here we are. We're live and got a pretty provocative title. It's actually a continuation of the last show we did, however many weeks ago that was. And this one is called "Is It All Occam's Fault?" All right, and I already got one response in email today saying yes, it is all Occam's fault.
Show
and
done.
That
Let's
was
go
from
home.
yeah. So it's Tim Mott from senior producer of the Morning Choice Show. Saw the email I sent out, and he responded and said, "Yeah, it's all pretty much Occam's fault." There's a bumper sticker that I've never actually seen the bumper sticker, but I've heard about it. I'd actually like to get it, but it says something along the lines of "I blame Occam." And so,
can I get you to move over slightly,
yeah,
Dave?
I was going to say,
you got off center.
Do I need to go this
there
way?
we go.
Okay,
Beautiful.
that way, just like that. Yeah, it looks very kind of wonky, doesn't it? All right, well, we have some people watching right now, so I just ask you if you're tuned in to YouTube or Facebook or X or TikTok or Instagram, whatever you're watching right now. Let us know who you are, where you are. Last show we had a lady in Canada that was listening to the show, and we periodically get people from various parts of the world and the country that listen in. So today we're going to continue what we did last time, and that was, I want to give an overview of a presentation that I gave last night to a group of 20 or so, would you say? Showed up about 20 people, to young people, anywhere from 19 to about 30 years old. It's a group that Cecil heads up. It's St. Philip the Apostle Parish in Flower Mound, and they have a young adult group. And I'm very offended at the icebreaker that Cecil did last night because
I'm on fire
what was it,
for this.
3 weeks ago, I think it was. The last talk was 3 weeks ago, and so Cecil said, I'm going to do something related to Dave and have an icebreaker. And if you don't know, I like snakes a lot. That's my favorite animal is snakes. And so she did the icebreaker 3 weeks ago about where's the worst place that you could ever find a snake. Okay, it's just kind of fun, right? So it's clearly related to me. So last night I figured, well, she's going to find some other angle, about me or some kind of tie-in. And then I find out the icebreaker was, at what age does an adult become old? And I'm like, well, being like 30 years older than everybody in the room, I'm like, and being the speaker, I'm like, seriously? I mean, come on. No, I thought it was kind of funny. The answers were really surprising. It was so varied. I mean, from some people think 21 is old. Some people thought 90 was old. I mean, it was all over the place, wasn't it?
It was. I always, when I choose, it seems like a very simple question, but whenever our group always just takes it a little bit wonky. And so, yes, we had age ranges. One person was like, I thought everyone was going to say 60, but apparently that's not it. I liked your answer. I think a couple people kind of went along with yours of it's your mindset.
Yeah. I mean, I guess, like what I said was, I think there are some people that are old when they're 13, and there's some people that aren't old when they're 90. I love the answer. One person said, "Yeah, it's kind of in the mindset, but when you're like 90, was that you or?"
I think that was Tova. I think that was my sister.
She said, "When you're 90, you're old." I mean, it's like, it doesn't matter how young you feel, you're old.
I would love it if some people in the comments want to answer that question and just say at what age does an adult become old? I just want to real quick shout out a couple people, Dave. We've got Joe watching on YouTube, watching from DFW and down the hall, and then we also have Paula from Bedford.
All right, very good. All right, thanks, Joe down the hall and Paula in Bedford tuning in right now. All right, so where are you, and when does a person become old? All right, so,
it wasn't personal, but I did think you might get a kick out of it. You know what I did actually, Dave, is that I had Googled philosophical icebreaker questions because I was looking for something that was a little bit deeper, because we sometimes do some pretty kooky questions. And I thought ones that are supposed to help people think, and I saw that one and I just thought it would be a little bit amusing when we had someone who was not 20 in our
right.
Not naming names, but there was someone.
Yeah, one person said when you have your first grandchild, and then somebody said, well, gosh, that could happen at 35 years old. I mean, and so it was interesting. I thought it was really neat. But it was really good. We actually had a larger crowd last last night than we had a few weeks ago. I was kind of afraid, to be honest with you, that the opposite would happen. That
it would get smaller.
Yeah, it would get so small. Like, I think the last time was maybe about 15 people.
Right.
And then I thought, well, okay, but 3 or 4 will show up.
Even had a seminarian show up.
Yeah, Paul the seminarian. He looked like a priest. He had a Roman collar on. I addressed him as father, and he's like, oh, no, I'm not father. I'm Paul. And Paul, he said Paul with 4 letters. I didn't quite understand that. I was going to say Dave with 4 letters, but
yeah.
All right. So I'm just going to give the same caveat that I said to the folks last night as I begin this, and we're going to go pretty much today a very, very quick history of philosophy, going from really the pre-Socratics all the way to Jean-Paul Sartre, who died in 1980. Is that I don't think you should necessarily study philosophy because it's fun or interesting or a cool thing to do, which of course I find all those to be the case with philosophy. I think you need to study philosophy because you have to because God gave us a faculty of reason and He wants us to use our reason. I think a lot of us can get a bit intellectually lazy. No offense, but we get caught up in scrolling through social media, and it's just kind of mindless, and or all into sports or TV shows or something like that. You can pretty much live your whole life never really trying to discover who you are, what the purpose is of human life, why things have gotten so crazy in our culture today. And I equated it to exercise. I don't like to exercise. I don't do it nearly enough of it, but I still know it's good for me. And the reason I don't do it is because it's hard, and I'd rather be doing something else. And I think when it comes to intellectual pursuits, a lot of people take the same approach, and they just rather do something else. But I think the state of our culture today kind of indicates that we need to take the exercise of our reason and trying to figure out what's going on in the culture today a little bit more seriously than perhaps we do otherwise. And so that's my little speech. Okay, so if some of this is tough, as I think it was last night, I mean, I gave quite a bit of information in the course of an hour or so, and I could see some of the people's eyes glazing over. Paul the seminarian, he did tell me, because I looked at him several times during the talk, and he was kind of dozing off. He said he enjoyed it, but he had just come from like a priest retreat.
Yes,
and
it was
two
days of priest meetings for the diocese that he had just sat and listened to talks all day.
And talks. And so then what does he do? But, but he came voluntarily. And I think that he had 4 years of philosophy, and he is in the process of writing his own dissertation. Had something to do with Origin and Socrates and the sacrifice of the cross and all these things that he was kind of bringing into it. So it was really nice to see him there as well. So that's my kind of introduction. I thought overall the response was really good. There were some really good questions, and some new people there as well. I'll show you this picture that I showed last time of the trains, if you could pop that one up, Sissel. And last time I was there, I said, between these two pictures that you see on the screen, one of them a train on its track, and the other one a train that has clearly, fallen off the track in a quite destructive manner, all spewing all over the place. I asked 3 weeks ago to the group of young people, which of these do you think better represents our culture today? And unanimously, they all said the second one, that the train has, run off the track. We are experiencing a train wreck of a culture. Last night, there was one guy. Was that Sean?
Yes, Sean Paul, yep.
Sean Paul that said that he thought the train was on the track, and he said he thinks it's mostly just the media that's always playing up all the bad stuff in the world. So that was a different perspective for sure that he gave, which I did respect. And so I also reintroduced this next slide, which is an encyclical by Leo XIII called The Restoration of Christian Philosophy According to the Mind of St. Thomas Aquinas. And it was written back in 1879, and Pope Leo at the time really saw that there was a big problem in the culture. I think he saw that, things were really going off track, and that something had to be done. So, this is the same Pope that gave us the St. Michael the Archangel prayer. And so he was very much in tune with the spiritual battles that the world was facing at the time. And if you think about, Karl Marx was to die 4 years later, so Marxism would have really already kind of hit the world, and Friedrich Nietzsche would have been alive, and Immanuel Kant would have already had his influence, and many of the existentialist philosophers. So what Leo did was he said the problem in the world is caused by bad philosophy. And if you have bad philosophy, the antidote, the solution is going to have to be good philosophy. And so he suggested that the church reintroduce and reemphasize to a greater extent the teachings of St. Thomas Aquinas, put it into the schools, put it into the high schools, the colleges, the universities, the seminaries, and make this an emphasis in the church. I think it could be argued that it never really happened. Maybe it did in the the late 19th century, early 20th, but I think that's been lost for the most part. I mean, how many high schools are teaching Thomistic philosophy? How is it being taught in seminaries? Probably to some degree, but maybe not as much as Leo would have envisioned. All right, so the next slide shows a whole bunch of philosophers, 3, 6, 12, 18 of them on this page. I asked 3 weeks ago, and I asked again last night, how many of these are recognizable? How many of them would you know the basics of what they taught? And if anybody is out there right now, I would throw that challenge out there to you. I know, Sissel, you're at a little bit of an advantage because you sat through the couple of them. How many of these do you recognize?
I can recognize a good number of them. I think I run into the issue of sometimes not always getting the right person with the face, like the face name with the face. Like I can name a lot of them. Like I know who's in this picture, but I do get a little confused. I think obviously Ockham is in that middle on the top. But next to that is that Descartes?
From our perspective to the right, that's Descartes.
Right.
Yeah,
and the guy on the middle row who is like to the right, all the way to the right.
Yeah.
With the mustache. Is that Nietzsche? Is that who's that? That is Nietzsche. Okay.
Yeah, that's Nietzsche. Yeah.
Yeah. I always remember Schopenhauer too, but that's not for good reasons.
Schopenhauer is the guy with the crazy hair on the sides, but then the bald in the middle, kind of in the middle. Georg Hegel's right in the middle, and then next to him is Schopenhauer, and then Karl Marx next to him, and then Nietzsche. And
then the bottom, the Ludwig guy. I don't remember his last name.
Yeah, hardly anybody has ever heard of Ludwig Wittgenstein, the guy that looks like it's like a prison shot there.
Yeah, it kind of does look a little rough.
Yeah, and he was a very strange, interesting character. But so, and then bottom left is Martin Heidegger, and above him, Jean-Jacques Rousseau. You have the three Greek philosophers up in the top left, starting with Socrates and then Plato. Those are not actual pictures, by the way. Those are...
you just blown my mind.
I know. And then Socrates, Occam, Descartes, Hume up in the top right. And then second row, Rousseau, Kant, Hegel, Schopenhauer, Marx, and Nietzsche. And then Heidegger, Kierkegaard, J.S. Mill. That J.S. Mill with utilitarianism actually brought up more conversation than most, because utilitarian is very interesting. That's where the young lady, I forget her name, but she said the thing about interesting about the train. Remember, she
Courtney,
said she said the thing about the train, which we can talk about here.
The trolley problem.
Yeah, had you heard of that before?
Oh yeah. Don't ask me why, but it's been like in my English class in college, and I feel like a lot of college classes, it just comes up as a part of a discussion at some point in time. You do the trolley problem.
Yeah, and when she said the trolley problem, I guess I wasn't thinking trolley. I'd heard it as a train and not a trolley.
I think, I don't know why. Maybe it is the train problem, but I think trolley problem just rolls off the tongue better. Maybe that's why they say it.
Yeah. So when we get to that one, I'm just going to briefly go through these. I'm not going to do as much detail as I did last night, because I had a lot of additional pictures that I showed last night. But I just want to real quickly here in a moment go through each of these, their major contributions, and they're pretty much in chronological order to some degree, but we'll talk about this, and I promise you after 30 minutes or so you're going to have a better understanding of the history of philosophy than you did now, hopefully, unless some of you are pretty well studied in it. And so if you want to leave any comments, or if any of this is of interest to you, or even if you want to answer that icebreaker question about when does an adult become old, you can do that as well if you want to make it a little bit lighter. And let's see. Okay, so I stopped with J.S. Mill, and then Ludwig Wittgenstein, Jacques Derrida, the dapper-looking dude with the white hair down the bottom, father of deconstructionism. Man, the guy just wanted to destroy everything. And then the guy with the pipe in the bottom right is Jean-Paul Sartre. All right, and that's the one that I kind of ended with, and very, very popular in his day, but I think he pretty much brought existentialism to its logical conclusion. And as Peter Crave says now, he said there aren't really many existentialists left because the existentialists were so incredibly ridiculous that, they kind of died out. All right, so the next slide is probably something you'll find interesting. And if you want to comment on this brought up some interesting conversation last night during the event. So on the left is a picture of an actual NFL football game, which I think was last year. And for some reason, I don't know if it was just an experiment or what.
I think one of the young adults last night clarified that was for a movie promotion.
So
it's a movie that's a movie that's about AI and stuff like that.
Oh, okay.
They used it as to kind of I think the idea was to unnerve people.
Yeah.
I think it was the concept because they wanted to see how people would react to it, or they just go about their business sort of thing, because it's promoting about having, I think, AI in there. That's what I at least heard.
Okay.
I haven't confirmed it myself.
Why? So these are robots.
Yeah.
And I'm very curious. Did the robots walk into the stadium?
No
Did they just kind of get carried in and sat down? I'd rather have a video of it than just a still shot. But nonetheless, I showed this picture last night with the word realism above it, because realism and nominalism is what the gist of my talk was, and I'll kind of explain what that's all about here in a moment. But these are robots that they brought, as Sissel said, for a movie promotion to an actual NFL football game. And then you see people behind them. And I don't know what these people were thinking, or if they were just freaked out by it. But when I saw this picture, I found it very unsettling, because I really do think that probably in our lifetime, certainly yours, Sissel, maybe mine, we're going to have a situation where there are going to be very lifelike robots that might be mingling with, regular people, and perhaps to the point where it may be difficult to tell the difference. And you might be in a grocery store, and there may be a robot there that's walking around that maybe they've perfected it to such a state that it's hard to tell the difference. And so the question I posed last night was, are these real? Is something like this, is it real? As opposed to the people on to the right here who are, and I don't want to use the real because they would prejudice the answer, but they're like ordinary people taking a picture, right? So if you want to weigh in on that, you can, and let me know what you think about that. And then I showed another picture. I don't think I have this one on the slide. I don't have it, of just like a fake snake and then a real snake, and what's real? Yeah, and I think it's a very fundamental question that we've got to ask. And so if you go to the next slide, you have William of Ockham, and he's the guy that is the title of this program. Is everything to blame for him? And as we go through the history of philosophy, you can see that there was a real break, a real rupture that happened with William of Ockham back in the 14th century with his promotion of not only Occam's razor, but also nominalism. And I have the picture of the cat there because Occam's razor is just kind of I guess a standard or a way of looking at life where you say that when you're faced with two different possibilities, you should typically pick the simpler, less complicated one, right? So whatever's simpler, whatever's less complicated, that's typically what's right, and that's the one you should choose. So I said last night that on the left you've got a little cat, looks like maybe a kitten, And one could say, well, all you have really is the material cat, and the cat kind of in a mechanical way is able to move around, and what you see is what you get, and you see the fur and the ears and the legs and the body, right? And that's what it is. Whereas somebody else who's a little bit more metaphysical might say, well, actually there's a soul that's animating that cat. Has a sensitive soul, and that's what is able to make it move and live. And Occam's razor might say, pick the first thing because it's more simple. To add something like a soul that you can't see, and there's some activating mechanism that you're just kind of adding that in, and nobody can see a soul. So Occam's razor might say there is no soul. It's purely material, right? I'm not saying that Occam said that, but that might be an application of Occam's razor. And the other thing is that his belief in nominalism would say that there's no universals. Okay, so this would just be one individual cat, and then if you saw another thing that looked just like it, you would give it the name cat, and then a third and a fourth and a fifth, and then you place this name on them rather than them having something that really binds them together, some nature, some universal element to them that they all share. And the thing with universals, just like the lady on the right there, is that if there are universals and there are natures, that also implies that there is some intended end that these particular creatures are kind of pointing towards. And so there can be a good cat and a bad cat, or a flourishing cat and a cat that doesn't flourish. There could be a human being that lives up to its potential and then one that doesn't. But nominalism would say that every single human being and every single cat is its own entity. There are no universals, there are no natures, and so there's no standard by which to judge them. And that's the problem of nominalism, is because with nominalism, and as you're going to see in the history of philosophy, all of that kind of standard is going to get thrown away, and you're left with individuality, you're left with things coming from a human perspective, and it shatters everything. Okay, that's why the name of the show is, do we blame Occam for everything? Because he didn't invent nominalism, but he was its greatest cheerleader. Okay, so that's kind of a little thumbnail sketch of what nominalism is all about. I am going to take a sip of water, and if anybody's out there and has any comments, you want to say anything about what we're talking about, by all means, jump in and let me know what you think about this so far.
Looking, I don't see any comments right now, but random, I do have a little more information about your robot picture. So it was promotion for a movie. It was a movie that came out last year called The Creator. It was all about, robots. And supposedly those were not actually robots. They were people dressed up as robots.
Oh,
so
right?
It was like special effects, makeup and stuff like that.
Oh, so they were actually people.
They were actually actors. There seems to be a huge, I got down a rabbit hole because there seems to be a debate on the internet whether or not they're real or fake. Because, of course, there's a lot of people who are going to, err on the very conspiratorial side of being like, no, they're actually robots. But I saw a video of them, and they walk, at least robots that we see, there probably are some more advanced robots that we don't know about, but the ones we see don't look that good.
Yeah.
They don't look that good. So it appears that at least the production company says that it was actors dressed up as people, dressed up as like the characters in the movie.
Well, it's actually a good idea, because here we are talking about it a year later.
Oh, it's a fantastic. No, and
I wonder
apparently
how the movie did.
Yeah, it doesn't see, because the thing is, I had not really heard much about the movie, but apparently this is the third time this has happened at an NFL game. They've done something like they've done a movie promotion at an NFL game, and I think it was also a bit of a joke because I think the Chargers didn't have very many fans, and so they put them on that side to make it kind of look like they're filling it up.
Had a lot of space.
Yeah, they're like, which is kind of sad, but anyhow.
Yeah,
sorry,
okay.
Random update on our robot friends.
All right. Well, thank you for that.
So
update.
I guess they were real because they were humans.
Yeah, so that answers the question. But then your standard of realness would be that they are humans.
Right.
And the thing I mentioned last night was, let's say they were robots. Well, somebody would have created those robots. Okay, there's somebody that designed the idea in their mind, and then somebody put it together and actually made them. And to that person, they'd be real. I mean, if I make a pen, it's real to me. So I guess the whole point is it's a legitimate question to ask what is real, and that's what we're going to be talking about for the remainder of the show. And let me go to the final slide, and I'm just going to go through this real quickly. We may not even, is it already 25 after? Oh my goodness. And like I said, if you're out there and you want to weigh in on this, or you may want to just say, this is crazy, I don't understand it at all, well, that's okay. Remember, it's an exercise. It's like doing push-ups. You got to do the hard work if you're going to understand where we are today. All right, so the top left picture is Socrates. Socrates is arguably the most famous, best-known philosopher of all times. And Socrates is best known for walking around Athens and annoying people. It's really true. He wasn't trying to annoy people. What he was doing is he was asking questions, all right? Because what he really wanted to do was get to the bottom of things. He wanted to know what are things? Like, for example, one of his famous ones is, what is justice? What is love? What is friendship? What is, I'm trying to think of the other ones. There's a whole bunch of them. He never wrote a thing. Plato, his star student, is the one that wrote all the dialogues, and Socrates was generally he had an interlocutor, somebody that Socrates was talking to, and most of them were dialogues as they were kind of arguing. So, for example, Socrates would say, what is justice? And somebody would say, oh, well, when we care for the poor, that's justice. And Socrates would say, well, no, that's an example of justice, but what is justice? And somebody would give another example. He'd say, well, yeah, but you're still not telling me what justice is. You're just giving me examples of justice, right? So if like this whole debate about what is a woman, if somebody said, what is a woman? I'd say, oh, Sissel's a woman. And they'd say, okay, but what's a woman? Oh, my wife Paula's a woman. Okay, but what's a woman? All you're doing is showing me examples of women, but I want to know what a woman is. So this is how philosophy kind of started, was one guy walking around Athens asking a whole bunch of questions of people. But the whole point, and this is the theme that we're going to kind of run through the entire show today, is that he wanted to know what was real, what was truth. Okay, what is a tree? What is a cat? What is a dog? What is a human person, right? What is it that makes them what they are? So he's trying to not just these moving examples of things, but he wants to know, what is it? What commonality do they all have? Interestingly, when we get to Wittgenstein, one of the really interesting examples that Wittgenstein used in his book, the Tractatus, is he was talking about the word game. And he said, let's look at game. Some people, there's a football game, Connect Four is a game. Baseball is a game. He even used the example of like Russian roulette. I mean, that's pretty sinister, but people would consider that a game. Poker's a game. Twister's a game. And what Wittgenstein said was, what do all these have in common? So what is a game? Okay, and it's a very provocative, interesting question, because why do we call these things games? What is a game? Is it just something that's entertaining? Is it just something that's fun? I mean, anyways, but that's one of the things that Wittgenstein said. All right, so that's Socrates. They ended up killing him. They gave him hemlock and, said, we're sick of all your questions. You're making us uncomfortable, so we're going to kill you. In 399 BC, he died in Athens, and his star student, Plato, the next picture, he's the one that said, well, yeah, you killed him, but I'm going to write a whole bunch of dialogues, and they're going to be famous. And here we are 2,500 years later, and people are still studying him with the same vigor and enthusiasm as they were 1,000 or 2,000 years ago. And so Socrates lives on, even though he never wrote a single word. Plato is famous for his realm of forms, where Plato believed there were two worlds. There was a world down here below where he said it was just all shadows. All the things that we're able to sense and see are just shadows of another world, another realm of forms of the ideal things. things, okay? The ideal cat or the ideal horse, the ideal circle, the ideal redness, the ideal of justice, right? So Plato is what you would call an extreme realist, because not only did he believe that things were real, that things had reality, but he put them in a whole different world. I mean, they're so real that they get they get their own world, right? And so that was, obviously this is just very much of a thumbnail sketch, but then Aristotle, his student, not only did he break ways with Plato, but he actually developed a whole different school. Plato's school was called the Academy, and Aristotle's school was called the Lyceum. And Aristotle fundamentally disagreed with Plato's realm of forms because he said the forms are not in another world. The forms are in the physical object. The forms are what's called instantiated in the thing. So if you see a dog down here below, we're running around, Plato would say that's a shadow that represents the ideal dog that's in this other realm, this other world. Aristotle would say, no, the form and the matter come together, create an individual composite dog, and that form is in it. And so the interesting thing about that is that it's easier for us to come in contact with the forms with Aristotle's method than with Plato's, because with Plato's, they're off in some other realm and it's a little bit more abstract, right? So those are the Greek philosophers. And again, that's just scratching the surface of their contributions. But when we're talking about this realism, that's important. And so realism means that behind the things that we experience in the world, there's something real that unites them. There's some universal, whether it's in Plato's realm or if it's found in it, there's something real there, all right? And so Augustine, who isn't shown on this this graphic here, said, yeah, those forms are in the mind of God. Okay, they're archetypes. They're they're in God. And Aquinas would certainly agree. Aquinas in the 13th century brought all this together. He synthesized it, and he brought in Jewish and Muslim philosophers, of course, the great church doctors like Augustine and Athanasius and Jerome and Damascene and Chrysostom, and he brought it all together, and he made this really, really beautiful synthesis of everything that had preceded him. And Aquinas was absolutely brilliant, and he also had the advantage of living at the time of Bonaventure and Albert and Francis and Dominic and all these great doctors of the church that lived in the 13th century. So you had, by the end of the 13th century, the Summa Theologia, the one that Leo XIII is saying that we need to get back to today, right? So why we need to get back to it begins with our dear friend William of Ockham, who I just talked about. You see him up there in the top middle of the page. And he looked at this scholastic model of realism, of kind of the Platonic Aristotelian model that Aquinas had synthesized. And applying the razor to that, he said, this all sounds really complicated. Certainly this other world of forms that Plato has, that Occam's razor says, no, that's too complicated. There's not this other world. We can't see it. We can't access it, so it doesn't exist. And even to say there's some form in matter and it's instantiated and all that, and there's all these universals, that's a little bit complicated. So Occam's razor started chipping away at this, and he said, there are no universals. Every single individual thing is its own, and we see similarities, and we apply a name to it. That's a dog, that's a cat, that's a tree, that's a river, and it's just names, and that's where nominalism comes from. It's nomen, which means name, and so universals to William of Ockham are out the door. Okay, so he doesn't believe in them. So that's where the train wreck begins. Okay, the train is starting to wobble a little bit, but it's not quite off the tracks yet. So I am going to take a little sip of water, and I don't know if we have any Any comments or questions or anything like that from anybody watching right now?
I think everyone's just listening with bated breath, and that's why they just can't formulate their questions.
They can't even get their fingers to the keypad because they're just mesmerized.
Exactly.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. Okay. So, all right. So we'll quickly go through this. We're already halfway through the program. René Descartes, you ever heard of him? He famously said, "I think, therefore I am." René Descartes lived in the 17th century. This was the time when science was exploding with people like Isaac Newton and Francis Bacon. And so Descartes, who was a very intelligent guy, said that he wanted to apply the scientific method, okay, where it's experimentation, it's trial and error and that kind of stuff. And he wanted to apply the scientific method to philosophy. And so the first thing he did was he said, I want to begin with universal doubt, okay? Anything that has any doubt, it's almost like the application of the razor, right? Let's simplify things, okay? And if anything doesn't pass the test of certainty, it gets out. So the first thing he did was he said, I can't trust anything that was told to me by authority, because that's not coming from me, that's coming from the outside. So I won't believe anything that just comes strictly from authority. So scripture is out, the church is out, everything that I've learned through authority is out, right? And then he said, you know what? And I also can't trust my senses. All right, so I sometimes my senses fool me. I may see a car way far away, and it looks like it's an inch, big, but it's actually a lot bigger. But my senses are deceiving me, so the senses are out. And he came to the conclusion eventually that the only thing that I can trust is that I'm thinking, and therefore, if I'm thinking, I must exist. And hence, I think, therefore, I am. So that's all. So he was the first rationalist philosopher, and all he trusted was his reason and not his senses, not authority. And he even went so far, I don't know if you know this, so as he said that, he said there might be like an evil spirit that is trying to convince him of things malevolently, so he can't, he just can't trust anything coming from the outside other than just that very, very simple, I think, therefore I am. Okay, that's all he could come to the conclusion of. All right, so he was a rationalist. People like Spinoza and Leibniz were famous rationalists that followed him. And then came the empiricists. And so Descartes said, we can only trust reason, we can't trust our senses. And then the empiricists like John Locke and George Berkeley and this guy in the top right, David Hume, said, we're going to go the opposite direction. We're only going to trust our senses. Okay, so all experience, like knowledge begins with experience. And so they're kind of like the anti-rationalists. And David Hume went so far as to say he doesn't even believe in causation, where if you saw one ball hit another ball, all you saw was one ball moving, the other one going away, but that cause in the middle of it, we didn't see it, so therefore it can't be out there, it came from us, right? Which started to move everything internally rather than, then discovering things on the outside. Now everything's starting to move into the human person. So from the perspective of the human person, rather than discovering the beauty and the enchantment of the world out there, right? The guy in the bottom middle left is Jean-Jacques Rousseau. He was very much a guy that stressed emotions and passions, and he wrote these kind of lascivious novels about, almost like Harlequin romances, of his day, and all the women just swooned over Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and very much, passion over reason.
Did he write himself as the main character of those?
I don't know if he did that or not. I actually have not ever read anything by Jean-Jacques Rousseau, but...
And certainly not those particular.
And he also was known... what was the name? He had The Social Contract. And he believed that man was born very innocent. I mean, not a man was born, but a person is born innocent and, very good. But then all these outside influences and institutions ruin him. Okay, so it's called The Noble Savage. That's what it was. It was the noble savage who's all these the government and the church and all these things that impose upon him make him bad. So he had an optimistic view of man at the beginning, but he also, and as you can see, that kind of mindset would turn people against government, against the authority figures. And he was one of the big reasons why we had the French Revolution and, priests and nuns getting their heads chopped off, right? So Jean-Jacques Rousseau, that was one of his big contributions. The guy next to him was Immanuel Kant. He had the Copernican revolution in philosophy, where he said rather than our minds conforming to the world, coming to know God through our experience with the created world, it was just the opposite. It's the world conforming to our mind, which means that we don't open up our eyes and discover God in the world. The world is conforming to us, and that was no bueno. That was bad, because that turned everything around. All of a sudden, it's becoming very much us. He went so far as to say that through these categories in our mind, we're actually kind of formulating our experience. Okay, so the raw material is out there that we experience, and then in our mind, we're giving it form. So you can see it's almost like we're becoming God. We're creating our experience, which, needless to say, is very different than forms existing in God placing them in creatures, and then us, through our experience with the creatures, coming to have a relationship with God. Okay, so that's why Kant, he's really one of the most famous philosophers of all time. He also didn't believe, he was a nominalist, so he didn't believe that we could ever come to know the reality of things. We could only know what he called phenomena. We could only know the things that were in our experience, that we could, physically sense, through our senses, that we could experience, right? So as I had mentioned last night, this kind of the realm of noumena, as Kant called it, fascinated the next guy in the middle there, Georg Hegel. And so he took that and he turned it into this whole kind of historical progression of God moving through time, through history, kind of bringing everybody in with him, including you and me, according to Hegel. Hegel was a pantheist, and so everything, including God, was moving through history to some like kind of ultimate state, which he called absolute spirit. And interestingly, Hegel thought that God reached that state of absolute spirit, surprise, surprise, at the time of Hegel. Okay, so he was the culmination. So he was, what as Peter Crave says, he was God's biographer or something like that. So Hegel was basically writing the history of the world and God moving. So you take away God's immutability, and it's just it's a very strange philosophy. But he also was incredibly influential and certainly one of the most famous philosophers of all time. So. Okay, if you are out there, I know there's a few people that are watching, and if you have any comments about this, have you ever heard of this stuff before? Is this new? How are our TikTok friends doing? We got a few of our teenage friends on TikTok following along. But anyways, if you have any questions, I'd love to answer them for you. Otherwise, I'll move on. Okay, from Hegel, we have Schopenhauer. This is Sissel's favorite philosopher.
My dear friend,
okay.
Schopenhauer, a.k.a. I think he just needed a hug.
I mentioned last night that Schopenhauer was found guilty. I said last night he threw a woman off a balcony, but I think what he did was he pushed her down the stairs, and she ended up getting very injured. I think she was annoying him, and he ended up having to pay her like a monthly amount the rest of her life because he had injured her. So he's just a curmudgeonly guy. He had a very, very negative outlook on life. He didn't see God. He didn't believe in God. But he believed in some like sinister evil force that was keeping the world going, and everything was just based on, the creatures eating each other, and, the sex drive was bad because all it did was propagate the human race, which he thought was a bad thing. But he didn't believe in suicide. He just believed you had to endure it. But just a pretty miserable guy. And Karl Marx is the next one. Marx, heavily influenced by Hegel. Marx took Hegel's kind of progression through history, but Hegel was on a very spiritual level. Marx took it down to a very physical level where, history was marching towards some culmination, and it was going to require conflict, of course, between the working class and the bourgeoisie, the upper class, and only through class conflict would you come to this classless society, the ideal state that Marx saw, this almost like this utopia on earth. And we had a heavy influence on Lenin and Stalin and all the Marxist communist regimes, even the ones that still exist today. And there's been a lot of death and destruction because of Marxism, and we continue to see influences of it in our culture today, and candidates who are openly calling themselves socialist and even Marxist in some cases. And so he was heavily influential, and I think Leo XIII definitely had Marx on his mind when he wrote Aeterni Patris. And then Nietzsche there in the middle, far right, the will to power, God is dead. Hated Christianity. Pretty much his entire philosophy was a revolution. He thought that he was going to single-handedly basically abolish Christianity and that, but he just for whatever reason, even though he was brought up in a Christian household, just to set his laser focus and his brilliant intellect on trying to destroy Christianity. And he declared God to be dead, and wanted to abandon reason for the sake of concentrating more on the will. And he was a very strange guy, and many people think he influenced Adolf Hitler. There's a famous picture of Adolf Hitler standing in a room staring at a bust of Nietzsche, and in light of the kind of will to power teaching that Nietzsche wrote about throughout his career, and him being German and Nietzsche's sister being a Nazi, who kind of changed a bit his writings to make them more sympathetic to Nazism. Many people blame Nietzsche for influencing Hitler, although the fact is Nietzsche never wrote anything anti-Semitic that anybody could ever find, right? But nonetheless, ideas have consequences, and many people think there was an influence there. In fact, the guy in the bottom left is a guy named Martin Heidegger. Heidegger was an existentialist philosopher, and he was German. And he spent his whole life asking the question, what is being? What is existence? We're thrown into the world and we're trying to figure out, what our place is. And he focused a lot on death but a very deep thinker, a very, very influential thinker, but wrote a book called Being in Time. And he became a Nazi. I mean, he was an actual Nazi at the end of his life, and he never apologized for it after World War II either. So that's Martin Heidegger. Next to him is Kierkegaard. Kierkegaard was an existentialist. Kierkegaard came up with the term angst, and he also invented the term leap of faith, because he believed he was a Christian.
So two very different,
yeah,
things
well,
going on there.
existentialists always have this element of angst. They're always nervous. I mean,
I would be too if that's if I believe the same way they did.
Yeah, because it's all on you. It's like the existence of the human being. Oh, well, like I said, Kierkegaard was a Christian, but Kierkegaard didn't believe in reason. He said the more reasonable the faith is, the less meritorious it is. So really, what you want to do is just if God is telling you to do something wild and crazy, then you just do it. You don't apply reason to it. You just do it. He loved Abraham because Abraham was asked to kill his son, and he did it even though it made no sense. It even seemed wrong, but since God asked him to do it, and so Kierkegaard wrote a lot about Abraham. I almost see, and again, I don't mean to make the comparison between Kierkegaard, but somebody like Mother Angelica, where she said when she said God cannot do the miraculous unless we do the ridiculous, or something like that, that famous quote.
Yes.
That's a little Kierkegaardian, like you got to do something ridiculous in order for God to do the miraculous. I would say there's a little Kierkegaardian element in there where, things don't have to make sense. Like when Mother Angelica ordered that satellite dish and it arrived and she didn't have the money for it, but she was just kind of trusting that God would provide. And then the guys at the door, you remember that story?
Oh, yeah. And
then, she goes in to pray and a guy on a yacht calls her at that moment and says, Mother, do you need anything? Yeah, I need $50,000. That's that kind of where it's not reasonable. It doesn't sound like it makes sense, but she did it anyways. Okay, so we're starting to run out of time. And I know a few of you are out there, and if you want to comment, you can. If you want to just kind of listen in, that's perfectly fine as well. But let us know if you're out there and where you are. But I'm just going to close out with these last few here. John Stuart Mill, the one that's kind of like in that dark background there, and he looks kind of creepy, right? John Stuart Mill was one of what we call the utilitarian philosophers. And utilitarianism's started by a guy named Jeremy Bentham, and Jeremy Bentham believed that when you're making a decision, you have to take into consideration the greatest good for the greatest number of people, right? So what's the greatest happiness or pleasure? He often talked about pleasure or happiness for the greatest number of people. And that's how you decide. You don't look at the individual, certainly don't look at any kind of abstract principles like justice or what's true or what's right. You just look at the result. Okay, that's why it's called utilitarianism. It's based on utility. And on the surface of it, it's like, well, yeah, that sounds kind of good. That doesn't sound like a problem at all. But it's really, really problematic. And this is where our trolley example comes in. And my understanding of the trolley, or let's just say train, because I think people are more familiar with trains than they are with trolleys. But if you're on a train and the normal path of the train is going in such a way that it's going to kill 10 people, right? And that's the track. But you have an opportunity to turn the train and you're going to kill 2 people. Is that your understanding of it?
Yeah, basically, like, you can either, and I think it's said in the way of, like, they sometimes even add things to it. Like, let's say it's your loved one on one side of the track, and then, and it's headed towards it, and then but if you pull the lever to change what direction the train goes, it's going to kill a lot of people. And the idea is like, should you, obviously, the thought process frequently would be like, oh, well, you're going to save more people. But then there's also the whole idea of you've now involved yourself into a situation.
Yeah, it's your decision.
It's on a course. It's going to happen. And now you come and now you have to hold that accountable that you're the one that actually chose who's living and dying.
Right. Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. And there's the very practical examples I used last night are things like euthanasia, where, let's say a family is they're running out of money because, grandma has Alzheimer's and you're spending a lot of money on caring for her. And the family would say, gosh, if we euthanize her, that would save a lot of money. And, the family would be able to do other things and send kids to college and that kind of thing. And, grandma would have to die, but the greatest good would be, for a lot more people. That'd be and I think that kind of situation plays out all the time in our culture today. And a utilitarian would say, yeah, you can do that because more people would have pleasure. Or if, some woman, is a professional athlete and before the season starts, she gets pregnant, and her team is on the cusp of winning some national championship. And if she gets pregnant, she won't be able to play that year. But if she has an abortion, then all the fans will be happy, and they may not even know because she doesn't have to tell them, and the teammates will be happy. And one child dies, but look at all the good that comes out of it, and they could possibly win a national championship or something like that. That would be utilitarianism. That means the greatest good for the greatest number of people, but it's not based on any kind of principles or any kind of the kind of things that Socrates was trying to get at is, what's common in all examples of justice or truth, that kind of thing. So the realism is thrown out the door with utilitarianism. All right, so just a few more here. Ludwig Wittgenstein. He was Austrian, came from a very wealthy family. And he wrote a very famous book called a Tractatus, which is only about like 80 pages long. It's really short. It's the only thing that came out in his lifetime. He had one posthumous book, but his famous quote is, "That which you cannot speak of, you must pass over in silence." And what I think he meant by that is that if you can't prove something, empirically, there's no point in talking about it. Like, for example, angels. Like and I hope I'm characterizing him correctly, because I think I am, is that if you can't see something, if you can't document it, if there's no logical basis for something, from a sense standpoint, like, don't talk about it. It's just ridiculous. And then we can get down to the language would be more meaningful to Wittgenstein if we only talked about things that we can actually verify through our senses. Right, that's my understanding. So you can imagine all the things that would be thrown out the door with that kind of a standard of, that which we cannot speak of, we must pass over in silence, right? And he says something about the limits of my language or the limits of my world. And so very, very influential guy. And you can see how many things in our faith, like grace, for example, and by the way, Wittgenstein ended up writing another book that came out after he died, where he basically said, you know what, I think I was wrong about all that stuff. So it's the first time in the history of philosophy where somebody wrote two famous books, and one of them was arguing against the first. And so, and before he died, he asked for a Catholic burial. So he didn't practice his Catholic faith throughout his life, but I think he ended well. And I don't know, for some reason I have sympathy for Ludwig Wittgenstein. All right, the second to last guy here, Jacques Derrida. He was the father of deconstructionism. His famous quote was, "There is nothing outside the text, and so a word is just a word. There's no meaning behind it. There's no significance. And if we try to put any kind of significance into words or language, we're imposing a bias on it." And again, I need to study him a little bit more, but that's my understanding of it. And then Jean-Paul Sartre, there with the pipe at the end. He was the last of the really famous existentialists, and his famous teaching was that existence precedes essence, which means that a person is born, they're given at birth is existence. And then as far as essence and what they are or who they are to become is completely up to them, and they create themselves. And they create themselves into whatever they want. So as you look around the world today and you see people like legitimately claiming to be cats and dogs, my wife was in Kansas City what was that? And she actually took a picture of a lady walking down the street, and she had a tail. You've seen furries, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, and there's schools putting litter boxes in bathrooms because kids are claiming to be cats. I mean, this is Jean-Paul Sartre's. This is the logical result of his philosophy. But you'd have to say that Jean-Paul Sartre and a lot of these philosophers that we talked about, this is a kind of a very logical progression of a rejection of the realism of Socrates and Plato and Aristotle and Augustine and St. Thomas Aquinas and all these people that put together this really beautiful system that really all it took was the initial doubt of a guy like William of Ockham saying, I don't think there are universals. I think there's only particulars, and I think we put a name on them. And so when the universals get flushed down the toilet, so do natures, and so does teleology, where, things actually have a purpose, things have a meaning. There's a way of judging whether, a cat is flourishing and living out its catness in a proper way, or a bird or a human being, and there's some standard by which things are supposed to live by. But when that gets thrown out the window, so does right reason. And you saw just in that brief history of philosophy there how the logical conclusion of it is that we don't know what any truth is, because truth has been, like I said, flushed down the toilet because reason was abandoned by all of these philosophers ever since what I consider the golden age of philosophy in the 13th century with St. Thomas Aquinas. All this is to say, with a minute and 45 seconds to go before the top of the hour, is that I agree with Leo XIII that we need to get back to St. Thomas Aquinas. We need to start thinking right. And I would suggest that we build up a curriculum that we start with grade schoolers, and we start to teach them to think of things logically, to start to understand form and matter, to understand the reality, to study Plato, to understand the realm of forms, to understand Aristotle, to understand how this all came together, and teach them at a very young age how to think, and so that we can start to erase the damage that has been done by a lot of these philosophers over the last 700 years, beginning with William of Ockham. And yes, we must blame Ockham, as Tim Mott put very succinctly in his email to me earlier today. All right, that's going to do it. Thank you so much for watching. And let's see. Did you see? Did you see
that just happened.
Oh,
while you're
okay.
chatting
Yeah.
here.
What is this?
I'm honestly not sure. Hold on a second. I haven't read over it.
Oh my goodness. Lisa, you want me to just read this?
Sure, go for it.
Okay, tread lightly. The eye that sees all will hold you to atonement. Within yourself is Christ, willing to grant those who walk the middle way the peril of great price. You know not where you do. She mentions the Tao, and that's an Eastern religion.
That's what I thought it was.
It has to do with. Let's see. Okay, so that's a little deep, Lisa, for me to tackle at the end of the show. But I do appreciate you, listening and paying attention and being out there. But yeah, Taoism is an interesting kind of belief, and I don't know enough about it to speak intelligently about it. But that's something that I want to do a little bit more study on Eastern religions. And because, Eastern and Western religions are very different, but they do have some similar, kind of universal, ideas that bind them together. Buddhism and Confucianism and all these kind of Eastern religions are quite fascinating. All right, Sissel, any thoughts, any closing remarks, any words of wisdom for?
Well, certainly not any words of wisdom, but no, I think it's great. I've enjoyed. I've gotten to hear you do the kind of walk through the history of philosophy and where things, kind of went a little astray, and I think it's super handy. So hopefully people will save this video and you can go back and watch on a recorded basis and kind of just review it, because I think there's a lot of really good information, kind of an overview of philosophy, if you will.
And you've had to sit through this several times. My goodness.
Yes.
You're shaving off time in purgatory.
I must. No, I enjoy it.
No, I appreciate it very much. All right. Well, thanks, everybody, for watching. And let's see. Next week, we will not have a show because I'll be coming back from Birmingham right about this time. I think my plane leaves at 1 o'clock, and I just cannot transport myself.
You can't do one from the airplane? I think that'd be. Can you imagine all the other people near you are just listening to you talk about philosophy?
They'd be like, stewardess, could I have another seat, please? This guy's annoying me. All right. Well, we'll see you in 2 weeks, God willing. Have a great weekend. Thank you for listening. Remember, it's a workout, right? It's a workout of our mind, of our brain. And thanks for watching. God bless you. This has been Back to the Father here on the Guadalupe Radio Network. Have a great weekend.
Thanks for joining us for Back to the Father. And don't forget, the glory of God is the human person fully alive. If you have comments about the show, email Dave Palmer at grnonline.com.